So this would kind of be part two to following up on yesterday's podcast. The new Boulder rules. Now, beta, trial, house rules. It's interesting to see how Games Workshop, and we'll see how this plays out, why they're pushing this out through the Warhammer community versus White Dwarf or some other update on there. And I don't want to get paranoid from that perspective. Is this a rollout or a test for the next edition of 40K? I don't quite think we're there. I don't think we're quite ready at that place. I think 8th still has a good amount of life in it. But there is no disputing, certainly, or at least my opinion, there is no disputing that Primaris is the way to go. This is the direction that Games Workshop is going to push Marines. Whether you believe it's a conspiracy for Games Workshop to make us rebuy all Marines on there, essentially nullify your entire Space Marine collection, no more mini Marines on the table, everyone's Primaris, or perhaps it's something halfway as sinister as that in terms of advancing the storyline, moving the Imperium forward, almost to the point where we have different factions ruled under Primarchs going against traitors and heretics and various Xenos. That sounds a lot like 30K to me on there. So possibly they're trying out or pushing the waters to move. In my opinion, and this is what the comments were certainly saying is true, Primaris are getting a massive boost. They're getting a lot of benefits out there that encourage you to play them, but also begin to separate them from their fellow 40K battle brothers on there. And I don't know how I would feel if certainly every Space Marine chapter has pride, whether it's one of the known chapters or a chapter that you have created yourself in the narrative, in the lore. But take a chapter that has an over amount of pride, like the Space Wolves. Can you see them fighting against, I mean, slip of the tongue there, Chaos, right? The Horus Heresy. Can you see them fighting alongside Primaris Marines on there? How would a Son of Russ feel about that, where their deeds are essentially nothing compared to these new Marines? Essentially how Guardsmen feel versus Space Marines, the Space Marines to Primaris, that jump in the narrative is right there. So how does Games Workshop represent that on the rules? If they, when they released the Primaris Marines and they introduced that concept, if they really boosted them up to the levels they should be, not only would that break the game, it would completely invalidate regular Marines, mini Marines, and we might have a player revolt on there, but it would also break the game because they would just slaughter every other Xenos army on the table without Xenos somehow getting a bulk up there. Imagine not only rewriting all the codexes and army lists, which they did correct on there, but in too short of a time. So that's the first question in this podcast, is this kind of a test run for future things? I mean, right now, Space Marines, Chaos Marines, they're benefiting from it. But when we see some of the rules and the profiles of the Primaris Marines, they really benefit from it tremendously. And I believe in the next couple of releases, when we see this as kind of a standard, they're going to benefit even more. Now, another comment that we were kind of kicking back and forth, would you rather have more shots or more wounds? I'd rather have both, but if you had to pick to boost your infantry, to boost your models, would you rather have more shots or more wounds? I would rather have more shots on there. 40K is a D6 dice-based game. There's not enough of a variable on the D6 on there. It's really, really easy to exploit. We see this with more and more infantry. Wounds are nice, but the ability, I use the terminology of passing through these kind of dice pools on there. So you take your unit that's going to shoot, and you have a dice pool. You assemble all the dice. Maybe you physically put out the dice next to each model. You pick those dice up, you roll them. That pool is going to get infinitely smaller based on the spread of a D6. Based on, I'm convinced, science can't prove it, but I think based on our magnetic fields and based on how we interact, I think we do affect the dice somewhat biomechanically of how we roll them, just how things happen on there. I can't prove it, but you can't tell me some people that have tremendous luck versus people that are not so lucky on there, how that operates and how that works. So you have your pool of wounds. Then we've got saves. Then you've got other things. Your pool is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. So I'd rather have a chance to inflict more wounds on you, to have bigger dice, to have a bigger profile in terms of base shooting or moving and then shooting or some of the other rules that this brings into play. And why don't Sisters of Battle get that? They should. They should have their own type of discipline on there. Absolutely. Because the bolter is iconic to them. Some of the other places where you see the bolter, okay, not so much, because in those army lists, they're going to have other kind of war gear upgrades and things. But I just wonder. I'd rather have the shots. My Marines are happy for the shots, but I wonder if this is feeling out something with Primaris to kind of boost them, to put them in a place. And there was a time that Marines knew fear, and now they shall know no fear. And when that was adopted around 3rd edition, at the time that was somewhat groundbreaking on there, because Marines were a little bit expensive and they would occasionally break and do crazy things. But once they got that base rule, that's stuck forever. So it could potentially change the game, what seems like a minimal switch, but not possibly so. Maybe not as much on there, or more than you think by getting those dice. So your secondary opinion on there, Primaris, absolute winners. Is this now, this beta rule, going to become, that picture of the iconic bolters that are now going to be in every single Space Marine thing, where they override the base weapons profile of the bolter or get these special rules? Or in previous editions of 40K where you had bolter drills and other things to push out the shots, well, now if all Marines get that standard, then you're going to get that plus whatever we're going to call it at the time in the future, chapter traits, chapter abilities, Marine abilities on top of that. You're going to double dip. You're going to get both on there. That's going to make Marines, and by extension Primaris, even more potent, even more powerful.